Almost. About to go live right now. So yes, you can start letting people in.
You got it.
All right. Hello, welcome, folks. I see we have several people already who have joined us today. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Eric Esteves. I'm the executive director of the Lenny Zakim Fund. If you can hear me, can you use your reactions and give us a thumbs up so I know audio is working good? All right, I see some thumbs up. If you can, so right now I am sharing my screen. So if you can see my screen, the Lenny Zakim, can you also give me a thumbs up?
Oh, I see you.
All right, so that's working, good. So for some of you are the early birds. So we actually are also live streaming on YouTube because we hit our limit. So if you know anyone or any of your colleagues who cannot access, we will drop the link in the chat so that you can share with them if they're unable to get into the Zoom. And in the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can just say your name and your organization, but we just want to know who's in the room, maybe where you are. So if you're working from home, where is that home at? Are you in Dorchester? Are you in Lawrence? Are you in New Bedford? Are you in Fall River? Are you in the Merrimack Valley or the Blackstone Valley or the Pioneer Valley, right? We want to know where you are. And in the meantime, we will get started in a quick minute. Also, I'd like to just introduce my colleague, Dominique, who's also here with us today. Dominique, can you just introduce yourself quickly to the crowd?
Hi, all. I'm Dominic Ramos. I'm the Program and Ops Administrator over at the Lenny Zakim Fund. If you have any questions throughout the application process, feel free to drop me a line. I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you so much, Dominique. All right, and with that being said, I have to do one last thing, and we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so again, thank you everyone for joining us today. As I said, my name is Eric Esteves, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lenny Zakim Fund. So the Zakim Fund is a public charity. So we're kind of like a foundation, kind of like a community foundation, but really the fund is a public charity. It was started by Lenny Zakim. So Lenny Zakim was an actual human being, and he was a very visionary human being. Lenny was a local civil rights activist, originally from New Jersey, who made his life in the Boston area, in the greater Boston area, and was very involved in civil rights activism, but also anti-discrimination, anti-racism, anti-Semitism as well. So he became the New England director of the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, for a long time, and led it very courageously. Unfortunately, in 1999, Lenny passed away. And prior to that, he was diagnosed with cancer. So some of you may have heard, you certainly have heard of the Zakim Bridge, but there's also the Zakim Center for, I think it's Intergenerative Cancer Research at Dana-Farber. So there's a center named after Lenny at Dana-Farber as well. So we strive to kind of continue his legacy, and hope to carry that forth ongoing. So the organization has been around for about 26 years, and really its focus is on social justice. So when Lenny actually was diagnosed, and the fund was started because he was offered essentially, like, people were recognizing him and wanted to, for instance, give money to colleges in his honor, and he pushed back and said, no, let's redirect that money to grassroots organizations across the state. So that's what happened, and the fund has grown since then. So that's just so you have a little bit of context about who he was and what he was all about. So The Zachem Fund as it is today. So I've been in the role for about a year and a half. I replaced the great Jude Goldman, who was my predecessor for over 13 years. And the organization currently, we focus on 7 funding areas. So those areas include, and they're quite a mouthful. Some of you actually look very familiar because you are our current, what we call grantee partners. So often in philanthropy, organizations that get funding are referred to as grantee. We prefer grantee partners because my approach to philanthropy is more as a partner than a funder. Just to give you a glimpse of how we approach our relationships at the Zachem Fund. So access to food, housing, and economic security. So we have organizations that have been in that funding area, like Backyard Growers, which is in Gloucester, folks like New England United for Justice, which is based in Dorchester. The second funding area, child and youth development and education. So organizations that are in that area include folks like Pi R Squared, which is based in Roxbury, Kids in Tech, which is based in Lowell, PACE, the Institute for Pan-African Education and Culture, which is based in Boston as well. In Area 3, civil and human rights advocacy and support. Many of our community organizing groups have been in that funding area. Number 4, health promotion and accessibility for all. So you may have heard of folks like the Resilient Sisterhood Project, which focuses on maternal health. I'm trying to think. I'm drawing a blank, so I'll move on. Area number 5, LGBTQ community support and organizing. So those include organizations like Black in Pink, Massachusetts, the South Coast LGBTQ Network, and Area 6, organizing and support for immigrants and refugees. So you may have heard of the Welcome Project in Somerville, Student Immigration Movement, which is a statewide organization. And then lastly, violence prevention, criminal justice reform, and family outreach, which seems like a mouthful, but there are a ton of organizations that fall under there, like Families for Justice as Healing, Thrive Communities, Partakers, which is in Newton. So those are some of the organizations that fall under those different funding areas that you may or may not be familiar with. And I say may or may not be familiar with because this slide, it really represents, who are the types of grantees that we fund and support. So organizations often are led by the people from the communities that they're impacting or serving, right? But not exclusively. Organizations have with small budgets. On average, the budgets are around 150,000 in size. And in fact, we actually have a maximum capacity and an upper limit of 350,000 for budget size. We say we focus on Eastern Mass. So very rarely do we receive applicants from Western Mass. We welcome them, but typically in the past, our structure was that we also offer, and I'll get to it a little later, we also offer in-person trainings and sessions. So the ability for other folks to get there was usually, harder, but certainly welcome applications from elsewhere. Organizations that have little to no full-time staff or are mostly volunteer run, or the board is running it. So some of our current grantee partners have staff, some don't. So we try to, accommodate a range of different organization types. Also, organizations that are either new or new to us. So for many organizations, the Zachem Fund is often their first time applying for a grant. So we really try to work with you and help you if that's your experience and your profile of this is all brand new and you heard about us. We really are focused on kind of grassroots organizations that are still figuring things out. But also on the flip side, there are some organizations that have been around for a while and just haven't heard of us or haven't connected with us over the years. And are either trying to just do things a little differently or just expand their fundraising reach. And then lastly, all of you are amazingly talented. I recognize some faces from folks around the city, some who are in development, like my former coworker Aaron, and I see Nashira here. I see folks like Raquel here. So folks that are doing amazingly great work, amazingly important work around the state. So we thank you for just even being here and considering us. So, you know, it's typically often a power dynamic in philanthropy, but, you know, we considered it a privilege for you to want, you know, to be a part of the Zakin Fund as well. And actually, take a quick pause because I just scrolled and saw Felicia. Are you still here?
I am.
So Felicia, I'd like to introduce Felicia Haywood is actually one of our newest board members who actually joined our grant making committee, which is called the Community Investments Committee last year. So when I started, I did an effort to kind of increase our community representation, and Felicia graciously accepted an invitation to join. And she, you know, certainly was an asset to us, but this year she is now the co-chair of that committee. So I just want to thank you for being here, Felicia, and for your, you know, commitment and your all of the free time that you're donating, because your time certainly isn't free, but it certainly is valuable, and we appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Eric.
So this is just a quick summary. So our grants are on total are around 600,000 a year, what we give out. So last year we were able to give out 614,000 in what we call regular grants. But you'll see my note, last year was actually the pandemic was a gift and a curse, right? So we actually gave out $1 million in total last year, which was the highest amount of money we've ever given out, because we were able to raise additional funds for emergency grants. So we gave out almost 350,000 in emergency grants last year. And this year we've given out 619,000 in regular grants and have already given out 77,000 in emergency grants. So, you know, it's, you know, we recognize the pandemic's impact on grassroots nonprofits and try to be responsive as possible. But also the other thing is our funding comes from fundraising. So our grant making doesn't come from a pool or a nest egg we're just sitting on. We actually are, you know, the beneficiaries of individuals and other foundations who then want to redirect that and redistribute that money to grassroots organizations. So the part that you're here for, because all of that was kind of fluff, right? The grants. Our grants range in size from $1,000 to a maximum of $20,000. So, you know, we're not huge in what we're able to offer, but we hope it's meaningful to you. The guidelines are currently on our website, and the window is open. So the application deadline is September 1st. And I'll get to the timeline right after this. Organizations are eligible for up to 5 years of funding. So it's not quite a multi-year grant, but we actually changed our process last year so that organization that applies and gets awarded a grant in that 2022, for example, then is eligible for 4 more years of funding. And your reporting process then serves as your reapplication process. So we try to streamline those processes as well, so that you're not reapplying each year. All of our grants, I say most, if not all, are general operating. So unrestricted, you know, it's not program specific. Really, you're describing what you do as an organization when you submit a grant to us. You don't have to be specific about one certain program. It's really what your organization does, what's the purpose, because we're really focusing on all the operational expenses, because we recognize there's things that go into running your organization. You may need money for programming specific things. You may need money for overhead and salaries or benefits and things like that, because there's a lot that goes into running a nonprofit. But however, we don't support things like conferences, sponsorships, one-time events, video projects, individual requests, research, or capital campaigns. So just as that caveat, we are pretty open, yet we have some restrictions on what we do not support. And please mute yourself if you aren't muted already, just as a quick reminder. So one of the other things that we offer is, beyond grants, we offer what we call capacity building support. extra support to really strengthen your nonprofit organization. So that comes in the form of a couple of things. Technical assistance. We like to refer to it as TA. There's a lot of jargon in the nonprofit sector, but TA, technical assistance or professional development. We offer those in the form of trainings and workshops. In the past year, all of those have been virtual. In the 25 years prior, they were all in person, actually. We offered a range of workshops and sessions, both in the spring and again in the fall. And then also in the past, we've offered what's called the Institute. Raise your hand if you've been to a Zakim Fund Institute in the past. I see a couple folks. But our institutes were essentially half to full day kind of mini conferences where we dive deep into different nonprofit management topics, whether it's strategic planning or fundraising. And we're looking to bring those back. So as we approach the fall, we're exploring hybrid options so that we can do sessions both remotely and virtually as we have, and in person for those who prefer kind of the in-person learning and the networking that goes with the in-person sessions. And also we're looking at doing them not just in Boston, which is where we're based, but doing them kind of around the region as well. Capacity building is also offered in the form of pro bono legal support. So we rely on DLA Piper and the Lawyers Clearinghouse for legal support. And that comes in many different shapes, but if there's a specific request, we kind of do an intake and then refer that to those organizations. We also offer mentoring and coaching. Folks can connect with me, or I can refer folks who have specific questions to others. Dominique also often fields a ton of varied requests or just things that come up. I have a question about this. Can we talk? Help me think through it. That's something that we're more than willing to do. And then lastly, networking. So the loss of in-person connections has decreased our networking a little bit. We tried to do things a little differently this year with some forced networking, but we hope to continue that because many of you are doing great things and don't know of each other. So for example, I'll give you one example. There's an organization, Adaptive Sports New England, and there's another organization, the United Spinal Association of Greater Boston. It's a mouthful, but they didn't know of each other, right? But one organization, specifically works with people who have spinal injuries and are just looking to kind of get their life back together and reclaim their hope. Another organization works with folks with physical disabilities who want to participate in sports and activities, and connecting those organizations. And now they're developing a partnership in some programming together. So the grant application process. So this is what our timeline looks like. Applications are due September 1st, and then our review stage takes place, the first stage takes place in October. We do a reading, we assign to our grant making committee, and then we essentially advance a couple of organizations forward to what we call our site visit stage. And that happens in November and December. And then finally in January, we have our final review and decision, and then notifications go out in February. So for me, the process is a bit longer than usual, but it's because we try to practice what's called participatory grant making. We have board members, staff, and we have community members that serve on this committee who do the reading and vetting of all the grant applications, so that it's not solely my discretion. We don't play favorites. We really try to read thoroughly and ask questions and ask follow-up questions if there's things unclear. So we try to give everyone a fair chance and opportunity. And also we try to the best of our abilities to give feedback. For many, this may have been the first grant they've written. So we try to give feedback on how the proposal can be strengthened, because we really want to make sure and ensure as many of you have strong organizations, or if you're seeking funding from larger or more structured foundations, that what they're looking for and the ways in which grants can be written to really tell your story. So again, this is just a visual chart of the grant process, showing our initial stage, the site visit stage, and the final review. And sorry, I just noticed we didn't have the transcript running, but now it is running for those who may need that. So the grant application. So what do we ask for? Pretty straightforward. We've been on a continual journey to simplify and streamline what we ask for. So it's basic organizational information, which funding area, which of the 7 categories your organization fits, whether you're fiscally sponsored or not. So some organizations do not have their own 501c3 nonprofit designation. That's fine. We just need some information about whoever your fiscal sponsor or fiscal agent is. And then we have narrative questions that talk about, ask you about, what is the community need you're addressing? What is the nature of the programming that you're doing? We also collect information about staff and board. So it may seem like we're asking a lot of you, but for us, it's useful to have that type of data, so then it tells the story of the organizations that we're receiving applications from and funding. So for me, there's a lot of humans behind the data, but it's important to sometimes tell their story through data. So that information is useful for us. So we call it disaggregating data, so that we are able to see kind of any hidden biases that may be coming up in our grant making, so that we can address it. So in the past 2 years, 2/3 of the organizations that the ZACM Fund has funded have been led by people of color. Either the actual staff, executive director, or if it has a different structure, or a majority of the board. And actually, to that point, one of the other terms you may have seen on our website or in our messaging is that we fund grassroots organizations that are under the radar. And typically what we mean by under the radar is that, you have an organization that may be new and it's, still forming, still figuring things out in its first few years, or you have a board that's more of a community board or a working board, but doesn't necessarily have high-powered people with titles who have access to other funding sources. So this is just another quick recap of the timeline. We have another info session like this on August 18th. If you know someone else or someone else who has an organization that you think would be a good fit for what we fund, again, applications are due September 1st, and then we have our process September through December with notifications in February. And then also every year we have what's called an award ceremony. I know some of you who are here have been to that award ceremony in the past, and really it's a way for us to recognize all the organizations that are being funded in 2022, to really highlight the work you're doing. So for us, it's like a celebration of nonprofits, especially focused on social justice in the Massachusetts, Eastern Mass area. So lastly, applying for a grant. And this slideshow will be available, but our links will be shared and posted on our webpage and social media as well. We use a system called Foundit, but you don't have to remember that name. But this is the actual, grantinterface.com is kind of the URL that they use. For those who are new to the system, it's pretty straightforward. When you get there, there'll be a login. So if you're new, you'll just have to create a new account. For those who are at an organization that is already being funded, you should have credentials already. And if not, Dominique will be the primary point of contact to help people figure out, resetting a password, or maybe if someone already has an account created, but you don't know how to access it, that's something that Dominique can certainly help you with. And frequently asked questions. So I figured I'd add this up front. So one question we get often is, my budget is 350,000. What are my chances? I would give you a very transparent answer and say slim, right? So I already said, on average, the budgets that of the organizations we fund are around 150,000. So when looking at all of the organizations that applied, often the conversation amongst the committee members is, what makes the most sense? Do we fund larger organizations, or do we stick to focusing on smaller organizations? So I would say, by and large, the grant making committee does lean more toward a smaller organization when it's a apples to apples comparison. What kind of technical assistance do we provide? So the seminars and workshops that we've offered just in this past year around fundraising, we did one on communication, developing a communication plan. We just did one a month ago on strategic planning for those who are either new to their organization and need to do a strategic plan, or someone may be leaving the organization and the organization is ready to figure out what the future of the org will be. How much money should I apply for? That's up to you. Again, I gave the range. We fund from 1,000 to 20,000. We don't have a specific number that we try to fund in terms of percentage of an organization's budget. I will say organizations that are newer, on average, those grants are probably closer to 10,000 versus a $20,000 grant. And then those who are being renewed are, likely have a larger grant size, but it's also based on their organizational size. What if I don't have a board approved current fiscal year budget? Send what you have, right? We try to be mindful of some folks are still figuring out how to fly the plane as they're building the plane. So the budget that you submit, we can work with you if it's, a little choppy. But you certainly want to have something that's been at least approved by the board, whether it's a budget or financial statements. And then lastly, to the point of financial statements, this last question, my fiscal year ends June 30th. Do I need to send a year to date and a full P&L or profit and loss statement? And that would be a no, because those essentially would be capturing the same time frame. So you would just need to submit one in that case. But those are just a few of the questions that we've been asked so far. So I'll leave this slide up. This is our kind of office email, office@thelennyzacumfund.org, where you can send questions or anything that was unclear in this session. Also, I will now open it up for questions. It's probably best if you use the reactions tool to raise your hand, and we'll kind of keep track. Dominique will we can flag in the chat who's up next. And again, this is being streamed on YouTube, so a video of this session will be available for you to watch later or share with someone else. Or if you join late, you can catch the beginning of it. So I see Mindy has a question.
Hi, Eric. Thank you. I have two questions. One, I think you kind of partly answered it, but I just wanted some clarification. If you are awarded a grant, and you talked a little bit about consecutive funding, how does that amount change after your initial grant? I think you just said that it will increase upon renewal, but just wondering kind of what that looks like over 5 years. And then my other question has to do with site visits.
Mm-hmm.
What if you don't have a site?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you guys do differently if there's not an actual place that you're consistently doing your work out of?
Yeah, so yes, I can take both. I'll start with the site visit one. So, when I started your job, I actually went to New Bedford and Lynn in the same day. But we also can be accommodating. So all of our site visits in 2021 were in 2020 were virtual. So we certainly can do Zoom sessions or just a meeting in person if you'd like, or are comfortable meeting in person. So we can certainly accommodate that. In terms of the grant size over time, so we're working on what we call a 5-year trajectory or a 5-year model. So ideally, there's an arc. One of the things, because our focus is on capacity building of nonprofits, we also have what are called challenge grants. So ideally, as you approach that kind of middle of the arc, ideally your grants are increasing in size, but also there's a component of your grant that is a challenge grant. And really the challenge grant is not to penalize you, but to give you leverage. So for example, you may get a $15,000 grant in total. 10 of it is kind of an upfront grant, and 5,000 of that is a challenge grant, where you can now say, does they, in your communications, we have you can say anonymous, or you can say it's us, but the Zacom Fund has a challenge grant. All of your gifts and donations over the next month will be matched up to $5,000. So it's a way for you to have leverage to then get an additional $5,000, because often in fundraising, it's that leverage that compels some donors to give. So we try to have the funding look like an arc, so that we're not funding you at your highest level in your last year, so that loss of revenue is not a harmful impact. But you also ideally have you already have that leverage and ability to leverage challenge grants as you kind of leave our community of being funded annually. I see a ton of hands. I'm not sure who's next.
Bonnie was next, and then Ronald and Chenchi.
Okay, Bonnie.
Sorry, hi. Yeah, I did not see diversity specifically mentioned in the areas that you focus on for your funding. So I just wanted to ask, our organization focuses on educational equity for people of color, diversity, education on racism in our community, things like that. Do you think that we would be in contention?
Yeah, the organization, just on hearing that, it sounds like it fits what we fund. We prioritize organizations led by people of color, but it's not exclusive. So, when I say 2/3 of them, that other third aren't led by people of color. But it's we don't have a kind of quota. That's just kind of what we focus on in terms of our outreach and communication.
Okay.
Ronald?
Hi, I'm Ron Sanfield, and I'm with Top Notch Scholars, a small nonprofit in Lawrence. Thank you. I just have a few mini questions. They're each very short answers. For the budget that is turned in, do you want the current 2021 projected, the 2021 budget, or the projected 2022 budget?
Well, to answer your question, either is fine with us. 2022 makes sense if you have it. However, I know that you're Top Notch is one of our current grantees. So you
Right.
actually don't need to submit anything right now.
Oh,
So that's what I was.
okay. That was
saying
my
earlier.
second question. When you talked about, thank you. I was wondering, when you talked about the multi-year or continuous year,
Yep.
I didn't know if that started with winners of last year's or it starts with 2022 going forward.
Yep. It applies to Top Notch. So right now, as an example, Top Notch was a new organization to us that applied last year. So this is its first year of being funded. So you're eligible for 4 more years of funding. So your report at the end of the year will be your renewal application.
Oh, I see. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Is that third question still applicable?
The third question is no longer necessary. Thank you.
No problem. Chinchi?
Yes, hi. So I have two questions. One is that, so if we receive the emergency fund in 2020, does it count as the first year? What does it?
No. So yes, so that's a great question. So the emergency fund is separate from our annual grants. So the emergency grants were eligible to both current and former organizations, but it doesn't penalize you. So that doesn't count as kind of one of the 5 years.
Okay. And my second question is that it's regarding to the challenge grant. So can we tie a specific event to the challenge grant? So for example, we are doing a show using storytelling as a way to destigmatize mental health and also addiction in the Asian community. So can we use that show to anchor the challenge grant?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, we're not we don't restrict you in how you use the leverage. We actually have a PDF, a toolkit where we give you ideas on how to be creative to go about. We just have some requirements in terms of just the documentation. So often people have sent like the email campaign that they created, showing that they were able to get donations because of it, but we don't restrict or dictate how you do something to meet the challenge grant.
So is there a particular timeline that we have to raise the money by?
By the end of the year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And we can find this information on the website, or will you send us the PDF?
Yep. So organizations that get funded and get a challenge grant will then also receive another document that is a PDF document that explains the challenge grant, explains, it gives ideas for different things and approaches you can do. And
Right.
also it gives, which we would need from you to kind of document that you've met the challenge grant.
So we never applied the challenge grant before. Will we receive that information somehow, or do we find that information on your website?
No, so it's not something that's posted. So it's part of kind of our notification process. So the committee determines some organizations, one of the questions is, are you interested in a challenge grant? So those organizations that have said they are interested in a challenge grant, then we consider those when we're making our determinations. And then, we essentially select a couple of organizations that seem like they make sense to get a challenge grant, and then provide that documentation to you when you're notified. So it doesn't come until February of next year.
So I saw an Aaron Truex had their hand up, and then Rita, and then Nicholas.
My question got answered, thank you. But hi, Eric, nice to see you again.
Hey, Aaron. Okay, Rita.
Yep. Hi, Eric. So good to see you. So this is a new organization that was founded about 11 years ago. They're 501c3. They serve the South Asian seniors population, Friends of Indian Senior Citizen Organization, and this is their first time applying for the grant. So what kind of, how can we make sure that, because they have the board of directors who are all seniors and they are not really technological savvy, and I'm going to be helping them, but it is something that I want to just make sure that, how can we make sure that they do a good job?
Yeah, so one of the things, so Dominique, that's kind of a big part of her role, is helping folks, one-on-one if necessary, walk through the application process. So, we can provide all the questions up front. If they need kind of help, explaining the questions, we can do that and help folks kind of navigate. And then also checking in if we see something that, is still outstanding. We can schedule times to really sit with them to get the application submitted.
Sounds great. Thank you. So good to see you, all of you.
You too. Nicholas?
Yeah, hi Eric. Thank you so much for this. Just a quick question about, or coming from an organization that is fiscally sponsored. Does the sponsors the specific sponsor and either their kind of general focus or their breakdown or their demographics, does that affect the applying organization's application at all, or is it mostly just to know for, on your side if it's 501c3 versus fiscal sponsorship?
Yes, so it's primarily the organization seeking the funding. So, we would want that, in this case, it would be like a program. So we would want that programmed. Do you mind muting yourself?
Oh, of course, sorry.
It would be that organization's specific budget, and if there's an advisory board versus a board of directors. So those details, and then whatever the documentation is for the fiscal sponsorship. Because some organizations are small but are funded by an organization with a $10 million budget. So we recognize those different dynamics. So we really are focusing on that smaller organization, but just making sure that we have kind of the documentation for the relationship. Lori?
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. We meet many of the criteria and want to know whether a desire for information technology is something that the fund thinks highly of in terms of capacity building so we can do more. Like things like websites, apps, and that sort of thing that enable us to expand our impact.
So I'm not quite sure. So,
well, if that were
we
in our proposal, do you generally like to exclude technology like the Boston Foundation says, or are you open to considering technology investments as part of our general operating?
Yeah, so again, we are not, because we fund general operating, we really focus on what you do as opposed to what you're going to use. We ask what you're using the money for, but it's really about, you're using the money to run your organization. So if you use the grant to purchase technology investments, that's fine. That's actually what several of our emergency grant recipients did last year. Zoom licenses, Chromebooks, tablets. Several organizations did that last year because they needed to invest in technology to support their remote programming.
So can I ask a follow-up question that's not related?
Sure.
Okay, so we did apply many years ago, and then the odds of getting funded became so slim, it wasn't worth a new organization putting in a request. What are our odds? Like if we were trying to get into college, how many did you fund last year compared to number of applications for regular support, not emergency?
So I would say the odds are, because I like math. So I believe we had about 74 applications last year. I believe of the new organizations, of that 74, there were about 16.
Okay, that's much better, because during one of the recessions, it was like 1 to 2 out of the whole application pool for new ones. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your candidness.
Sarah?
Hi, Eric. Thank you for taking my question. I'm curious to know, so if you're an organization that sort of currently definitely meets a lot of these criteria, especially around budget and size and full-time staffing, but you have a sort of capacity building strategic plan that will eventually, hopefully, pull you sort of out of that. Do you tend to work with organizations that have those aspirations and fund them to sort of help them get there? Or do you focus on organizations that sort of don't have that infrastructure yet, at least theoretically?
So my answer to that, it would be both. So we again, we don't dictate how you should run your organization or what your growth should look like. There are organizations who have been funded by us, by the ZACM Fund, for example, the Peace Institute and UTEC in Lowell, that are now, have $1 million plus budgets. And actually, Partners in Health is another organization that we're an early funder of that has a very large budget now. But there are several organizations that are still around still have a $200,000 budget. So there certainly is room for both. We don't kind of prioritize. There are some organizations during the course of their 5-year window that may grow and exceed our budget limit, and we just recognize that, and that frees up a grant space for another organization essentially. So they may get funded for 2 years and then grow so large that they exceeded a $500,000 budget and then aren't eligible anymore, and then we're able to fund someone else.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, I do not see any other hands raised for questions, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So barring any last questions, I will say thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found this informative and helpful. We will have another info session on August 18th. If you visit our YouTube page, you'll be able to access the recording of this info session. And then also everyone who registered and everyone who attended will receive this slide deck as a PDF, also with links to our application. So with that being said, thank you all for your time and have a great day.